get started with today's episode, I would like to quickly read you our podcast disclaimer. This podcast is for educational purposes only, and it is not to substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. You should always speak with your physician or other healthcare professionals before doing any fasting, changing your diet in any way, taking or adjusting any medications or supplements, or adopting any treatment plan for a health problem. The use of any other products or services purchased by you as a result of this podcast does not create a healthcare provider-patient relationship between you and any of the experts affiliated with this podcast. Any information and statements regarding dietary supplements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. All right, and now we'll get started with today's episode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Fasting Method podcast. So very, very recently, Megan and I announced to you that we had the most amazing, greatest pleasure in introducing our friend and colleague, Dr. Terri Lance, as one of our co-hosts. So Terri will now be joining us very, very often and either recording with me, recording with Megan, or the three of us recording together for a new fasting method podcast format. So today, Terri and I are here together. So Megan will be back next week, but Terri and I are here together to speak to you about a topic that many of you know is near and dear to my heart, TRE, time restricted eating. Terri called this episode All Things TRE. And even though I talk about TRE all the time, time restricted eating, I joke that it's the Beyonce of the show. It's the epitome of intermittent fasting. It's really the foundation to your success if you're planning on doing intermittent fasting for whatever your particular goal is. I have never discussed this topic with Terri and with all the great things that Terri has to bring to the table. So as you probably know, if you've heard me before, and if you've worked with me, I'm a very practical person. I am a very solution-driven kind of person, as Dr. Fung has often joked, if the problem is you've got loose stools, then Nadia wants to find you a solution for loose stools. But Terri brings some very important learning topics to the table. I often joke that I do most of the learning when it comes to Terri. I absolutely love everything that Terri has to share. And this is a topic, behavioral, your relationship with food, your emotional eating, all of this is not something that I consider myself an expert in. So I cannot wait to hear all things and to talk about all things TRE with Terri. Hi, Terri.
Hello, Nadia. Great to be here with you today. Excited about this topic. I know that you have referred to this as the Beyonce of the show. And I, of course, don't come to your meetings. They're early in the morning for me and busy with other things. But I always get to hear people talk about, oh, yeah, Coach Nadia said that. And as Coach Nadia always says, so I definitely hear these concepts being really reinforced by you. And some people who have started to work with me more may actually have found themselves being a little bit frustrated because I take people back to TRE because I generally get clients and people coming to my meetings who are struggling, not so much with the fasting, but they're struggling with the eating. And they come in and they say, oh, I've done 5-day fasts. I've done 10-day fasts. I do lots of fasting. But between my fasts, it is just no holds barred. And I rein them back in. I said, okay, well, we're going to change that. Because fasting without TRE just isn't very effective. It's a lot of work with not a lot of payoff. So I love that you emphasize TRE, time-restricted eating, a lot. Because to me, when you really think about it, all fasting is TRE with longer windows of time between those times of eating. So TRE is the building block of fasting. You start with getting yourself going on eating meals only eating at mealtime, and waiting until your next mealtime. Now, sometimes your next mealtime might be 6 hours later. Sometimes it might be 18 hours or 42 or 120, but it's still all TRE.
You know, guys, this is music to my ears, right? TRE is my thing. It's my first pillar. And what Terri was saying is so true, because even though we don't get to work together, as in we don't sit with the same client at the same time, it's really great to have the ability to sort of bounce people back to Terri, and she, you know, has her people coming into my meetings and know that they're going to hear a consistent message. This is something that I have often find with the people that I work with, you know, and I've often said this, women, people in general, I do a lot of work with women in fasting, but people in general feel paralyzed when they hear conflicting information. So it's really important that within our program, within our team, they're getting this very, very consistent message that TRE is the foundation, the building block, as Terri called it, to your success, regardless of what fasting you may end up doing in the future. There's a couple of things, Terri, that I've been mentioning to our community in my meetings lately, and I just wanted to hear your thoughts on this, which is I cannot wait, and we joke about this in my meetings, but I cannot wait for the day that people come in and they say, what? People used to do 5-day fast before they did TRE? That's just crazy. But that's not what's happening. What's still happening is that I'm meeting people and they go, hey, Nadia, I'm on the 36th day of a fast. Now what? And I start to talk to them about TRE and they have no idea what I'm talking about. They have these huge eating windows on their eating days or whenever they eat, you know, they don't have the appropriate gap between meals, or they really just don't even understand what TRE stands for. You know, there's still a lot of people that are doing, you know, the famous 16-8, in that they fast for 16 hours and they eat for 8 hours straight. So, you know, this is exactly what we're here to talk about. And I cannot wait. I'm going to repeat this because I'm a big fan of repetition, but I cannot wait for the day that people come into our community, into our program, or that we meet them in consultations and they think that it's crazy that at some point people used to do 5-day fast before they knew how to properly do TRE. And really, it's the analogy that we use is, you know, somebody who's going into grade 7 without never having done kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2. I mean, these are very important learning sort of foundation for your secondary learning. You know, you got to do the elementary school, and TRE is definitely that. People often will refer to TRE as just doing TRE or just doing a 16-8, but I cannot repeat this enough. I cannot overemphasize that this is the epitome of intermittent fasting. For you to have a successful fasting day, whatever that length may be, you must understand and give TRE the critical importance that it deserves.
I think part of the reason why it's complicated at this point and why you still hear people being totally baffled that there is something else besides doing long fasts is that when people first hear about fasting, maybe through social media or some other places, they simplify it into thinking, well, I'm either eating or I'm fasting. And they think of fasting as being, ooh, that's that difficult time when there's no food coming in. But oh, what a relief. Now it's eating time. And they just see that as a free permission time. As long as I already fasted, it's okay just to eat now, however often, for however much time, whatever food, versus really understanding why they're fasting. Because if you really understand why you're fasting, you will get why TRE is so important. It's about not activating that insulin in your body so frequently. Something that you mentioned, Nadia, that is almost a cringe thing for me still when I hear people say it, is the term eating windows. And oftentimes with language, we need a way to describe a concept, and then people start to take that very literally, and they make their own meaning of it. So let's back up and talk about when many people first learn about fasting, they might hear about 18-6. And so what they hear that mean is I fast for 18 hours and then I eat for 6 hours. And you and I both know what we mean is you fast for 18, you have a meal, you fast, and 6 hours later, you have another meal. That's TRE. No snacking, no grazing, only meals. So these are the words I try to get people really used to saying. I eat meals. I don't let any of my people ever use the word I eat snacks. That's not what we do. We don't eat for 6 hours. We eat a meal. I relate it to when you go to a restaurant, you don't just keep having them bring you food for the next 4 hours. You go in, you are served your meal, you're done, and you leave. Same thing at home. You plate your meal, and I know that's a big concept that you emphasize. You eat the meal, and you're done. And now you're fasting until your next planned mealtime. Now, the reason the phrase eating window still kind of makes me cringe a little bit is the way people tend to interpret that, as it means I wait, I open my window, everything's fair game until the last second when that window closes. And I know listeners can't see us as we're doing this, but I always imitate this at this point, is that if people say, oh, I have an hour eating window, they eat their meal, let's say at 5 o'clock, they're done, 5:15, 5:20, but then they look at their phone or their watch or the clock and they say, ooh, I've got 40 minutes left in my eating window. And then you hear them, 25 minutes later, okay, I've got this much time left. And that's when they start, what else do I want to get in here during this eating window? So they really bypass that messaging of having a meal and stopping. So if I could give everyone the basic guidelines of fasting, this is where I would start. You eat meals only, and then you fast until your next mealtime. And then you start to stretch what that means. If you have that basis, fasting is going to be so much easier.
So you mentioned one of my favorite TRE subtopics, which is plating. So a long time ago, I wrote an article called Plating and Mindful Eating. Now, there's very little mindful, emotional, behavioral there is, to be honest, because I was having trouble with grazing and snacking myself. In fact, I never had a full meal my entire life until well into my 30s. I snacked and grazed my entire life. This is why getting a good practical concept for me was important. A good strategy for me was important. That was a long time ago. I came up with this and I called it plating, even though plating means something totally different. Plating means making a plate look pretty, or it means like taking something that's not gold and putting gold plating over it. But I called it plating a long time ago. Now our community uses that quite a bit. It's a very useful concept for me, and I cannot wait to hear your take on it. But here's very simply what it means to me. Plating means that I do not eat from a cupboard. I do not eat from a package. I do not eat from the fridge. I do not eat while I'm cooking. I do not eat from my cute kid's fork because she's 9 already. She's always still trying to stick her fork in my mouth. Very common. Kids do this. I do not eat as I'm cleaning up the plates. I do not eat my kids' leftover food. I don't eat in my car. I don't eat in front of my computer. I don't eat in front of the TV. Now, what do I do instead? And I don't do this anymore because I don't need to, but this is how I started doing it. And that's why the name plating came in. I put a plate somewhere on a table in an eating place because I did grow up with the family tradition of we only ate at the table. I did grow up like this. I know many of you no longer did, but many people did grow up like this. You've probably forgotten, but probably when you were a little kid, or at least you can see how people still do this and why there's a good reason for it. People only ate at the table. So in my house growing up, I was not allowed to eat on the couch or anywhere else. In my room, never. I never take a plate into my room. But I know people now do this very loosely. There's this very loose way of eating. It's not even what you're eating, it's how you're eating that I have the biggest concern, and probably where people are having a lot of their trouble. So I put a plate somewhere on my nice dinner table. And throughout the day, as I found myself kind of going into the cupboard, to the fridge, or while I was cooking or whatever it was, whatever I decided that I wanted to eat, this is sort of like a delay, don't deny type of strategy, although it's not that I'm advocating everything that theory says, but the notion that I would put it away for later. And when it was time to eat, I would sit down and I would have all the things that I planned on eating around me, and I would start eating until I finished. And when I finish, and I still use this strategy, once I get up and walk away, the meal is done. In fact, I do this with my kids. My kids sit at the table, whether we are eating with them or not. Most of the time we're there around them or with them. I might sit with them unless I'm working, because I do work weird hours now that I live in Portugal. So sometimes they're eating with my husband or they're eating the two of them together. But they do have this concept that they eat at the table only, mindful eating, so no iPads, no phones, etc. And when they're done and they get up and they walk away, they're done. So often I'll ask them when I see them getting up, because I got to do that for myself. Are you done? Yes, I'm done. And once I get up and walk away, that's it. I still use that. Sorry, Terri, maybe I'll think about this and change it, but I still call it my eating window is closed. And it isn't that long 6-hour eating window. It's usually 30 minutes to an hour. What do you think about that? And what are some things that you can add to help our listeners, particularly when it comes to, the behavioral aspect of it, their relationship with food, maybe even the emotional aspect? Because here I'm probably overlooking a whole lot of things. For example, I just thought of this. If you're putting a whole bunch of food around you, maybe some people would be concerned that they're going to overeat, that they won't get up until they've overeaten.
The first thing I would go back to is the idea, again, about the eating window. I think the way you're describing it is very congruent. The eating window means I start eating when I'm ready to eat. I stop eating when I'm done with that meal. I think where the eating window concept gets distorted for people is when they set a number of minutes that it will be. I know that some of this for some of us comes from a really important strategy. So for example, when you say to yourself or to your girls, are you done? You need to check in. Have I had enough of this meal? Because you might say, I've been sitting here for a little bit, but actually I'm not done. Okay, then I'm going to have, I'm going to eat more of this meal. But I think the way most people have started to kind of extrapolate that is, I still get to keep eating as long as I haven't used up my minutes yet. It's kind of like when cell phones used to, I only had a certain number of minutes you could use, and you want to use all of them. So I don't think it's a problem to check in and say, am I done? Have I done a sufficient, approach to this meal? Because you're going to walk away from this meal and you're not going to eat again until the next one. Are you sure you've had enough of this meal? This is where I, though, often encourage people, be really mindful. And some of you who may be a little newer to listening to me, this will be a little bit of a concept to get used to. The idea that we have a little bit of our brain that's kind of a slippery slope, primitive brain. So let's say you say, am I done eating? And by doing that, I say, or do I want something else? Oh, that little slippery slope part of your brain say, yeah, I want this. And now you go and get that other food. Now you've, probably eaten something that's problematic for you, or you've eaten excess of food because you asked that part of your brain, would you like anything more? And it will always want something, and something problematic. So instead, to check in, have I sufficiently completed this meal? One of the things I saw recently in the forum, someone was writing about a huge non-scale victory for her, as she is realizing that she sometimes finishes a meal and there's still food on her plate, because she's now getting the right signaling from her body and knows, I have actually completed this meal, even though there's still some food here. So it's not how much more food can I put into this mealtime? It's, am I sufficiently fed from this meal?
I have some thoughts, because at the beginning, and again, I'm somebody who functions well with rules in general, in life in general. I like rules. So I didn't have an issue with creating these rules for myself. But at some point, I did not allow myself to get up and go and get something. So it wasn't like I would get to the end of the meal and be like, do I want something else? Yes, of course. I want junk, because that's what I would eat. That does not work for me, or did not work for me at the time. I would put stuff on my plate or around my plate that I wanted to eat. And I would eat what was available, and I would eat until I was satisfied. And once I was done with what I had around my plate, I would walk away. And that was it. as you often say, Terri, kitchen closed, restaurant closed. These are strategies that I've learned from you and I've shared with people because they might relate to that better than some of the things that I say. So that's something that it's not like I say to myself, because you're right, I could just keep going. I could just keep eating. Plating for me means exactly that. I do not get up because I don't want to. I do not want to get up and go and get something that I'm not going to want to eat or that I'm going to regret eating later. I first decide, I repeat this, they're not mine. I probably stole them from somebody, but the 3 keys or steps to success. First, it's making a decision, a commitment. Then it's preparing. And third is executing. So first, I decide what I want to eat. Secondly, I prepare. I put the food around my plate on my table. I take some time and make sure that I have everything that I want so that I don't forget the salt, or I don't forget this, so I don't have to get up and go and get it. And then third, I just sit and eat. And once I'm done, I walk away. Done. So it's okay if today I forgot some type of food. What I tell myself is it's okay. I'll eat it later when it's my next meal.
Another important thing about the plating is that what you created for yourself, Nadia, is you created a visual representation of this is a complete meal. This is my food for now. When we're standing at the cupboard, standing by the stove, reaching into a bag, we have no visual concept of enough. We just keep going versus you have given yourself a tangible way to see, oh, this is complete, which I think for so many of us is really helpful.
People often ask me that, and this is another topic in and of itself that we can tackle another time, but people often say to me, I do not know when I'm hungry, when I'm full, I do not know what enough is. So I personally do think that it's okay for you to define, at least initially, because eventually you will feel when you are satisfied, and that's what we want. We want to get to that point where our satiety hormones are functioning properly and we're actually able to feel when we are satiated, satisfied to walk away. I definitely have good satiety signals. I know when I'm done, no issues, no hunger for the next 6 to 8 hours. But at first, if you're having trouble, it's okay, as Terri said, to define what a complete meal is for you and what a sufficient amount is. And again, it might take some time, some practice to eat that and walk away. And yes, you might still feel hungry, or maybe you'll say, oh, that was too much. Next time I'll put a little bit less on my plate.
Absolutely.
Well, Terri, as I usually say at the end of most of my meetings, to be continued. TRE is one of these topics that I've said this many times, I feel like we need an entire masterclass on TRE. So by no means do we feel like we have tackled this topic to its entirety, but we will definitely have to come back to this. I think this was a great way to get us talking with Terri specifically about this topic that we often talk about. We answer questions about it. So Terri, we're making a commitment right here to have a part 2 and probably 3 and 100 on TRE. How do you feel about that?
I am on board with that, Nadia. I'm already writing notes of All Things TRE 2.0. Like we've got a next one already lined up. So I'm very excited about this.
I am too. All right, everyone. Well, thank you. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week for another episode, this time with Megan and I answering some of your questions. Happy fasting, everyone. Bye for now.
Take good care, everybody.